To this very day, there isn't a zombie game quite like Project Zomboid. This isometric zombie apocalypse simulator is easily the greatest zombie survival game of all time, despite it looking like an early to mid-2000s PC game. Zomboid may look like some janky indie game fusing zombies and The Sims, but beneath its retro graphics lies an insanely deep and unforgiving survival experience. As the saying goes, never judge a book by its cover. Be that as it may, we're not going to talk about gameplay in this video, at least not extensively, but rather we're going to dive deep into the story of Zomboid itself. You see, after doing a deep dive into the game's lore on my private time, I just knew I had to cover this at some point on the channel, and with Build 42's stable release on the horizon, now's the perfect time. But before we explore whether or not we could survive the Zomboid apocalypse, I need to lay down some ground rules for this thought experiment. Instead of analyzing the virus within the game's setting of the early 90s, we're going to bring the Knox Virus into 2025 to see how it would play out in today's world. I'll also be sticking to the standard apocalypse settings within the game. So no sprinting zombies, just good old-fashioned fast shamblers. Now with those two main ground rules in place, I think we can now begin this exciting conceptual exploration of Project Zomboid's Knox Virus. Whenever we discuss a zombie apocalypse, and whether or not we mere mortals can survive one, it would behoove us all to analyze the sort of zombies we'll be facing. And in the case of Project Zomboid, the Knox Virus presents us with an all too familiar foe, Romero-styled undead fast shamblers who are highly durable and seemingly everlasting until you destroy their brains. These biters are attracted to light and noise, and they also travel in large herds. They're strong enough to eventually break through metal barricades and just smart enough to seek the path of least resistance, which may include crawling under cars. They don't starve, they don't rot away, they don't freeze in the winter either, although they do slow down, and aside from destroying the brain, these Zeeks can be terminated by lighting them on fire and watching them burn, which is a fairly lengthy process I might add, but generally effective against large hordes. Overall, the undead threat in Zomboid isn't all that imposing. But these fast shamblers aren't the real threat when it comes to the Knox Virus. What truly makes the Zomboid apocalypse terrifying is the fact that the Knox Virus is fucking airborne. While the origin of the virus is, as of Build 41, officially unknown, what is known is that the survivor you play as in-game is one of the few who are immune to the airborne strain. While there isn't an official immunity figure known to the community, the dedicated Zomboid player base has estimated that roughly 2 to 5% of people are immune, meaning that almost all of you viewing this right now would eventually catch the virus and succumb to its 100% mortality rate. Being airborne, the virus cannot be realistically quarantined. It will eventually reach the vast majority of civilization, with the few exceptions being extremely remote and isolated locations. Not only must you worry about the undead, but you also gotta practice social distancing procedures and use PPE in order to minimize your risk of contracting this apocalyptic contagion. Now, if you happen to be immune to the airborne strain of the Knox virus, you're definitely not going to be immune to the bloodborne strain of the virus. If you get bit, that's it. But if you were to get scratched, you'd only have a 7% chance of being infected. If you're lacerated, those odds jumped to 25%. Once infected by the Knox virus, you will experience 5 stages of symptoms before reanimating. Stage 1 occurs in 5 to 12 hours, where you'll start to feel queasy. The feeling will persist until Stage 2, where you'll begin to get nauseous. After 25 hours, you'll reach Stage 3. Here's where you get sick, like the common cold or flu. Stage 4 occurs after 49 hours. It is here where your body will begin to systematically shut down, causing you to feel immense pain. You'll also experience a noticeably high fever. And no matter what you do, you will die on the 72nd hour. And within 1 to 2 minutes of expiring, you will reanimate. Now, if you somehow die prior to succumbing to the virus, with your brain still intact, you'll still fucking reanimate. We can also reasonably assume that infected liquids and or foods can also spread the virus, considering that infected blood and or contact with the undead, like a scratch, can infect you. So overall, it's safe to conclude that the Knox virus isn't some joke. It's rather terrifying, to be honest. Unlike Snyder's Dawn of the Dead or The Walking Dead's wildfire virus, the Knox virus has a clearly distinct ground zero. As such, we can easily assume that your odds of being at said point of origin are actually quite low, regardless of where said epicenter actually is. Which is pretty important, because this buys you time to prepare for the coming storm. And with the aid of today's technology, it wouldn't be long before people learned that the Knox virus is airborne and also reanimating the dead. As such, your first challenge will be recognizing the threat of this virus before it spirals out of control, and certainly before everyone else decides to panic when they figure it out too. Now, within the lore of Project Zomboid, the epicenter of the zombie outbreak is in Knox County, Kentucky. From there, the virus eventually escapes the Knox County exclusion zone, which was erected by the US military, and the virus gets out within 2 weeks. Although the story hints at the airborne pathogen escaping quarantine much sooner, considering that just 3 days after the zombies break through the exclusion zone, cases of the Knox virus are confirmed in England, South Korea, Japan, and in other cities across America. Considering that this virus goes global in roughly 2 weeks, we can safely assume that you too will only have 2 weeks or less to prepare. It honestly all depends on your location relative to the spread of the airborne strain, and also where we decide to place the epicenter of the outbreak in 2025. But let's say you're not convinced that such a contagion can spread so rapidly. Let's go ahead and do a little math. The average person in America is estimated to come into contact with, at bare minimum, 16 people per day. Let's say patient 0 sneezes and infects just 6 people on day 1. Then let's assume that every person who is infected also infects just 6 people. Within 3 days, which is the time it takes to die from the Knox virus, 259 people would have been infected. By the end of the week, 335,923 people would have been infected, all without the use of zombie bites. And this is all assuming everyone ideally comes into contact with just 16 people per day. If patient 0 goes to school or works a job where he or she is exposed to hundreds of people per day, the spread could easily spiral out of control much earlier. If patient 0 works in the tourism industry, for example, the virus could make landfall on many different continents overnight. And unlike zombie bites, airborne pathogens are fucking invisible. You won't know you're sick until you experience symptoms in 5 hours. And even then, you might not self-quarantine due to mild symptoms like queasiness or nausea. Hell, we all know a ton of people who will go to work or even go out in general while feeling ill. So to be blunt, this virus is going to spread insanely fast. It simply will not be contained, especially if the point of origin is within a major city. What can I say? Exponential growth is a real bitch. Now, if we assume you have at least 2 weeks to prepare, which is quite generous, you'd have to survive a level of civil unrest that you've never ever experienced. Riots, mass looting, mass evacuations, and desperate refugees fleeing the chaos and the undead, along with potential logistical issues reducing supply chains to dust, thus leading to food shortages, potential power grid issues, and other general infrastructure complications. Long story short, you'll be dealing with the collapse of society before the dead ever reach you. At this point, your odds of survival would still be kinda decent, depending on where you are, but it would, without a shred of doubt, be a dangerous time to be alive. But assuming you've managed to prepare and assuming you've survived the civil unrest that such a pandemic would cause, you'd ultimately still have to contend with the fact that you probably wouldn't be immune to the airborne strain. At some point, the airborne variant of the Knox virus will reach your region, and eventually, you'll either succumb to the virus or everyone around you will, at which point you'll be outnumbered by a factor of 2 or 5 to 100. And even if you survive the undead and the virus itself, you'll have to survive in a world you likely wouldn't be able to survive in. Can you cultivate your own farm? Can you raise your own livestock? Are you proficient with medical care? How good are you at bushcraft? Can you perform maintenance on a generator or on a vehicle? Can you effectively start a fire which won't attract the undead or hostile survivors both during the day and night? The list of skills needed to survive in the long run is insane, and the game actually does a great job of portraying this. But it can also cause some players to be delusional. The game isn't hyper-realistic. Many gameplay mechanics you rely on are simply unrealistic. You can't just watch TV and learn a skill permanently. Most of the time, a skill not only needs practice to develop, but also continued reinforcement. Skill retainment is a real problem, especially if the skill is highly technical. Most people cannot just sit down and read an entire book in one sitting. You can't fit an unsealed cooking pot filled with water in a garbage bag without spilling it. And swinging a weapon while walking backwards wouldn't really generate much kinetic energy. It's a shit way to fight zombies. Speaking of zombies, they wouldn't just target doors and windows. I would also be remiss if I failed to mention that due to the nature of this contagion, forming a community might not even be safe, due to the fact that some people in said community might not even be immune to the airborne strain of the virus. And if you're not immune and they're infected, you might just get sick and die within your own safe haven. We don't even know if immune persons are carriers of the virus, which if they are, you'd be extra fucked. No matter how you slice it, this is very likely the end of your run in this plane of existence. You'll either die due to a hostile survivor, die from a zombie bite, be eaten alive by a horde of the undead, die from the airborne strain, or you'll die due to starvation, dehydration, exposure, and or any other failures of general survival. Project Zomboid's Knox Virus would likely kill 99% of everyone watching this. So no, you and I probably wouldn't survive this apocalyptic event. Anyways, if you like this sort of content, please like, share, and fucking subscribe. Click the bell as well, that way you may be notified when I publish a new video. And remember that you may opine anytime if you feel so inclined, down in the comments section. I'm Captain Gold and I hope to see you in my next Gold Standard video.